Imagine being born in a tiny town to a family with barely any money. And then, within just 44 short years, absolutely all of Europe is terrified of your name. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking a literally unbelievable historical journey. We're going to dive right into the incredibly fast-paced rise and the utterly devastating fall of one of history's most famous and maybe infamous figures. So, what would your life actually be like if you were Napoleon Bonaparte? It's a pretty wild thought experiment, right? We're going to walk through this whole staggering journey step by step. And as we do, I want you to try and step right into his boots. Try to feel the ambition, the immense pressure, the massive victories, and yeah, ultimately, those crushing defeats. All right, Section 1, a Corsican outsider, the early years of a future emperor. Let's set the stage. Okay, picture this. You're born in 1769 in this small, rugged town called Ajaccio in Corsica. You're the second of 8 kids. Sure, your family technically has noble blood, but let's be real, you're completely broke. Then, at just 9 years old, you're shipped off to a super strict military school in mainland France. You barely speak a word of French, and the other kids, they mercilessly mock you for your thick Corsican accent. You are the ultimate outsider. But you've got a secret weapon. You absolutely dominate everyone around you because you are just unbeatable at math and strategy. While the other kids are out playing, you are entirely obsessed with military history, spending hours alone just poring over complex battle maps. And you know what? That intense obsession pays off incredibly fast. You power through all that mockery and graduate as an artillery officer when you're just 16, a teenager with a military commission. Then 1789 hits, and the absolute chaos of the French Revolution breaks out. You realize pretty quickly you're no aristocrat at heart, so you ditch your noble roots and go all in with the revolutionaries. Fast forward to 1793, at the Siege of Toulon, you pull off this brilliantly calculated artillery maneuver that decisively breaks the siege and wins you your very first major military victory. That rapid ascent leads us right into Section 2, the brilliant young general, making a name on the battlefield. Because of that genius tactic at Toulon, your career just skyrockets at a speed that's honestly hard to even wrap our heads around today. Get this, you're promoted to general at the incredibly young age of 24. Just imagine having that much power, literally holding the lives of thousands of seasoned soldiers in your hands while you're still in your early 20s. By 1796, they hand you a massive new job, commanding the army in Italy. But it's kind of a nightmare gig at first. Your soldiers are starving, completely demoralized, and barely have any equipment. But you don't fold. You take this desperate, scrappy army, you rally them together, and you absolutely crush the Austrians, defeating them again and again. Your name spreads like wildfire across France, and you come home an absolute, undisputed hero, realizing for the first time just how much the people actually adore you. But hey, you're way too smart to just rely on battlefield wins to stay popular, right? You realize perception is reality. So you basically become a master of early political propaganda. You actually launch your own newspapers for the explicit purpose of hyping up your victories and making sure the public practically worships your every success. Which brings us to the highest stakes of the political arena in Section 3, crowning yourself emperor, seizing ultimate power. The speed of your political climb is just insane. In 1799, riding that massive wave of military fame, you seize power in a swift political coup. You name yourself the first consul of France. You're only 30 years old and you're essentially running the whole country. But with your boundless ambition, that's simply not enough. Just 5 years later, in 1804, you take it to an unthinkable historical peak, and you arrange to be crowned Emperor of France. And at that coronation, you execute the ultimate mic drop power move. Traditionally, the Pope puts the crown on the monarch's head, signifying that power comes from God. Well, you refuse to wait for him. You literally reach out, take the crown right out of the Pope's hands, and place it on your own head. It's this massive, unprecedented statement of unquestionable authority. You're telling the world, I didn't just inherit this, I earned it myself. That absolute authority ushers in Section 4, the Master of Europe, a decade of dominance. For the next 10 years, you are practically unstoppable across the European continent. Take Austerlitz, for example, which historians widely consider to be one of the most brilliant tactical battles ever fought. You achieve the impossible and decisively defeat both the Austrian and Russian armies at the exact same time. This massive, crushing win basically hands you direct and allied control over the vast majority of Europe. Nobody can touch you. But your legacy goes far beyond just winning wars. You introduce the Napoleonic Code, a massive, comprehensive legal framework that completely revolutionizes the law. And this matters immensely because it ended up influencing the justice systems of dozens of nations around the globe. Actually, scratch that. It still forms the basis of many countries' laws today. Right now, a modified version of it is still in force in France. You are fundamentally shaping the modern world. But nothing lasts forever, right? Especially not absolute power. We reach a grim turning point in Section 5, the Russian catastrophe, the biggest mistake of your life. It's 1812, and driven by this need for total control, you make the catastrophic call to invade Russia. You march in with an unbelievable force, 600,000 soldiers. That is the largest army ever assembled in human history at that point. You're expecting a glorious, decisive battle. But when you finally reach Moscow after a grueling campaign, you don't get a surrender. Instead, you find a ghost town. The city is completely empty, and it is burning to the ground. What follows is an absolute nightmare. The brutal Russian winter sets in, your supply lines entirely collapse, and your men just freeze and starve. 90% of your incredible, historic army perishes in the snow. Less than 10% actually make it back alive. It is a steep, horrifying decline from the absolute heights of your grand empire. Which plunges us directly into our final tragic chapter, exile and defeat, the rapid fall from grace. The chaos of your final years happens at breakneck speed. Smelling blood in the water after Russia, the Allied powers overthrow you and force you into exile on the island of Elba. But come on, showing that you never give up easily, you pull off a daring escape. You manage to get back to France and reclaim power, but only for a desperate 100 days. In 1815, you suffer your final definitive defeat at Waterloo, and this time they exile you to St. Helena, this incredibly remote, isolated rock way out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And you never leave. The guy who was once the undisputed master of Europe spends his final days pacing around a lonely island under heavy guard. You die there in 1821 at just 51 years old, with the likely cause being a slow, agonizing battle with stomach cancer. It's just an unbelievable whiplash of a life, isn't it? Starting out as this poor, heavily mocked Corsican boy hiding in his maps, rising up to become the absolute master of Europe and the single most feared name on the continent, only to lose the whole shebang and die completely alone in a heavily guarded exile. The highest of highs, followed immediately by a staggeringly fast fall. So that brings us to the end of today's explainer, leaving us with this one final provocative question. Would it have been worth the risk? To experience that kind of absolute power, the adoration and the ambition, knowing the terrifying human cost and the total crushing isolation waiting for you at the end? Think about it. Step out of those boots for a second and let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.